Let me start by referencing a conversation I overheard only yesterday. Two guys in their late 30s, early 40s, and they were talking about not being able to shift stubborn belly fat. So what would you have to say to people like this?
Right. Well, this is a common question. I mean, I'm an internal medicine doctor turned obesity medicine doctor. And now with advanced training and doing our own research, I'm really a keto medicine doctor that just following the language, but it's also a low carb method that I use. So what does that mean? Well, the main issue is the sugar and starches, not the fat. So, and that's a big change from when we were growing up in, well, the last, I guess, 4 or 5 decades, where the focus was cut out the fat in the food to cut out the fat on the body. Well, that didn't quite figure into the metabolism that happens after you eat different things. So the sugars and starches raise the blood glucose, and raising the blood glucose raises the insulin. And so it's insulin that's the fattening hormone. So if someone wants to cut back on the belly fat, you really want to cut back on the insulin, the fattening hormone elevation in the blood. So then that means cutting back on the sugars and starches. And while, yeah, the message is out there about sugar, it's starch too. So if you have potatoes, pasta, rice, fruit, these are really all digested to sugar in our bodies. So, but if you're young, healthy, you don't necessarily need a keto level of lowering the carbohydrates. But I think the main message that we should get out is that focus on the sugars and the starches if you want to reduce that belly fat.
You were talking about fat there. I had a great conversation with a journalist, Nina Teicholz, who wrote a terrific book, The Big Fat Surprise, where she talks about Ansel Keys and about the American Heart Association and the message that they gave the public, certainly in America and probably the larger Western world, about dietary saturated fat, how they demonized fat, and then how the sugar industry and the big food producers who create ultra-processed foods benefited from that demonization of fat. Could you talk to us about how that message has been construed and how it's been conveyed to the public about how fat is quote-unquote bad and how sugar and how carbs have benefited and the companies that produce these carbs have benefited at the expense of people's health?
You use the past tense. No, it's still happening today. So saturated fat has been demonized. Again, that oversimplification that, fat on the body must be from the fat in the food without understanding that really important hormonal change in between. So the idea that saturated fat is bad never made sense to me as a doctor. In medical school, we learned that saturated fat is the form that we store fat in our body, so that our bodies make saturated fat. I mean, if this is toxic, why do we make it ourselves, right? The same thing for cholesterol. The lower the cholesterol in the food, the more your body makes cholesterol because it's so important. So you can manipulate the foods, and yet your body will figure out what to do. And yeah, I liked the Nina Teicholz's book because it puts all of the how did we get into this mess in one read, as well as Gary Taub's Good Calories, Bad Calories. They're very similar, but very different in the type of material. Gary's is much more scientific with references, hundreds of references about it. Suffice it to say, today, most people coming in, they kind of know that was didn't make sense, and yet we were all duped or brainwashed, kind of slowly. And yeah, you're mentioning the industry today. They're still doing it. There's always going to be an organization that says saturated fat is bad. Well, that's the American Heart Association, because they were created on the idea that saturated fat was bad. So it'd be like telling the Christian church to change their belief in a different God. I mean, it's because that it was never scientific. It was based on a concept that fat was bad, and fat in the food alters or worsens the heart or the arteries. So you have to be careful about organizations that are on a specific teaching agenda, what's behind them. And then the sugar industry, best I can tell, is doing what the tobacco industry did, and that's to give money to researchers to study other things. So one of my colleagues got into a bit of a mess, or a bit of hot water, because he was studying exercise, just exercise, an obesity researcher. And I was always kind of curious why he never talked about diet, but he only had an hour, but everyone looked to him for that obesity information. Well, it came out that Coca-Cola and other companies were funding him to study something other than Coca-Cola, exercise. Of course, he didn't really understand, he just wanted to study exercise. But what happened is kind of unwittingly, he fell into this trap of not studying the elephant in the room, which is the sugars and the starches. And, but in something like Coca-Cola, they can make sugar-free things. They can make water and make money from it in bottles. I mean, so that they can do the sugar cane industry, or if that's just their own only product, they're going to want you to study something else. And, don't forget that you eat or drink sugar, glucose, your blood glucose will go up. It's kind of now in my world, in an obesity medicine world, people come in wearing these glucose monitors, even though they don't have to, they don't have diabetes, but they're basically recapitulating what we've told people through the years. If you eat something starchy or sugary with carbohydrate, your blood glucose will go up. So people come in and say, well, I ate a banana and my blood glucose went up. And I'm like, well, but yeah. So anyway, even if you disbelieve anything in the world, or everything you're taught, you can measure it yourself and recapitulate science. It'd be like saying, there's this thing called gravity, but until I do this 100 times, I'm not going to believe there's gravity. Anyway, but it is confusing, I have to say. But but the main message, I think, is that it's the sugar and starches, and there have been all these other forces to distract scientists from studying this.
Okay, well, we'll come back to the conversation about clarity and about confusion and about information and dissemination in a second. But if we can just dive into something you referenced a moment ago about blood sugar and glucose, I want to ask you just directly, outright, is it possible to reverse pre-diabetes and or type 2 diabetes? And if so, how quickly can you see that reversal in your experience?
Absolutely, yes. You can reverse pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes. These are elevations in blood glucose that are above what is typically seen and lead to really bad things like diabetic complications like blindness and kidney failure, amputations, heart disease. It's not a path you want to go down, or if you're on that path, you need to know that you can reverse that, but you have to understand it's the sugars and the starches and the foods that raise the blood glucose. And then it's the abdominal obesity, what you started out with, the belly fat, that whether it's from wheat or from beer, that creates the environment called insulin resistance, which might be pre-diabetes in the doctor's terms. So absolutely, these are reversible. And 100 years ago, before there were medications, I have a textbook. If you come to my office, I should have a show and tell sort of thing that I do in teaching. And 100 years ago, the low-carb keto diet was used to treat diabetes because they knew it was the food and the sugar that in the drinks and the food that raised the blood sugar, and they didn't have medication. And so it was very effective, actually, to use a low-carb diet to reverse and even now prevent. It's interesting because I can see things in my office, in my clinic, that aren't in the research publications yet. And I used to be that kind of doctor, where, well, if it's not a randomized trial, it's not in a publication, I can't believe that it's true. Well, I had to visit doctors who were using this method and other weight loss methods to see it for myself. And so what we see in the clinic is way ahead of the clinical trials. The obesity studies are out there and done. Their meta-analyses on low carb versus low fat, and low carb basically is as good or better in every case. There was that study. For diabetes, there are more and more studies, but you get this weirdness of Virta Health, which is a very high-tech answer to, blood glucose and blood ketone measurements, and you have to have a scale, and you have to have a app to talk to the doctor, and it's thousands of dollars a month. Well, it works without all that stuff if you just cut the carbs out of the diet, and they use a low carb diet of the 20 or 30 total grams per day. So absolutely, these conditions are reversible by changing the lifestyle and really just the diet alone. And it's so unbelievable, people don't believe it. So it's that case where you have to come to a clinic where it's happening to believe it, or talk to doctors on the internet like this who are in a clinic where they see this. Things change fast, though. In the last year, I get people coming to me now already fixing their diabetes without me. And that's good. I mean, the only worry I have is if someone's on medication that can become too strong, the medications can become harmful. And if you don't get off them really quickly. And so to your point, you can reverse diabetes in a day. If someone is drinking 2 liters of sugar beverage, which I've seen, 2 liters a day, and they're injecting insulin to cover, basically to treat the sugar they're drinking, they stop drinking the sugar and they get off the insulin in 1 day. But so you have to be measuring your blood glucose in order to react and adjust back down or even eliminate the medication. So that's kind of that sort of information. A lot of non-physicians don't want that out there because it could be, harmful. But then keeping people on medication and having them eat carbs is harmful in the long run. So that's an interesting finesse of a lot of the books that are written don't teach the really strong version because anyone can read a book. Anyone can do that. But I think now we're able to teach the detail of being very careful of how to get off insulin, and with the advent of the glucose monitor or even the finger sticks, if you measure your blood glucose before taking insulin, you're protected, because when the blood glucose is down, you don't take the insulin or other medications. So this is the fun that I have in my practice now. I learned how to do this for obesity, and heartburn gets better and all these other things, but people who have been on insulin for decades, coming off insulin, there's no one happier. I mean, but my other doctor said I could never fix this. Well, did they ever talk to you about what you eat? I mean, in detail? Well, no, they never. Right. So my secret weapon is food and biochemistry. What a great combination. Calories are important, no question, for weight loss. But it's not helpful. So the best I've heard it said, Gary Taubes has a segment where he says, what if we were looking at a restaurant and you ask me, why is it crowded? And I say, well, more people went in than came out. Well, no, why is the restaurant crowded? Well, more people went in than came out. So there's this, yes, more calories went in than came out, but that's not helpful. Why is the restaurant crowded? Is it great food, great service, a great view from the top? So Gary, I loved his way of putting that into a different metaphor. Of course, it's about calories if we're talking about weight loss. Now, David Ludwig, who is at Harvard, is a little more, should I say, diplomatic, and he calls it so Gary basically says these people they're just kind of stupid, if you're focusing on calories, because, yeah, of course, more people went in the restaurant, but David Ludwig calls it a tautology, which I had to look that up. I'm liberal arts trained and then in medicine, but I don't know that word. Of course, David Ludwig would find it. Tautology means it's true. So in a compromised paper that David wrote mainly, and we contributed to it, he brought together the calories in, calories out people and the carbohydrate insulin hypothesis people, the scientists who see this paradigm. It's like looking at the elephant and, it's a trunk No, it's a tree. No, it's a wall. So he calls it a tautology in that paper, which really kind of means that people, the CICO, calories in, calories out people, are basically saying that more people went in the restaurant than came out. We know what causes a crowded restaurant. And, when Gary wrote or talked about that on a podcast, I went back to meetings and I couldn't listen to those folks anymore, because they had that paradigm view that we know what causes obesity. It's just calories. No. So then I meet doctors who are using low carb diets, Dr. Atkins, Dr. Eads, Dr. Rosedale. They didn't talk about calories, but the calories went down. And they were just cheeky enough to not say that that's really what happened. So, but really, it might be, I guess, more honest to say it's a low carb diet that leads to a low calorie diet. But they just wanted to be a little different. And so they never said, well, it just lowers the calories. But now when it comes to diabetes, there's a big difference between eating the same amount of calories of sugar and the same amount of calories of fat in its relation to the blood sugar elevation. The blood sugar is going to go up because of eating the calories that are made of sugar. The fat itself doesn't raise the blood glucose. So when it comes to diabetes, there's a big difference in the calories, the type of calories you consume. But there was a program in Durham, North Carolina, in the States. Duke University had it for a while, and it went out on its own. It was called the rice diet. So when people hear, oh, you're at Duke and Durham, what happened to the rice diet? Well, it doesn't exist anymore. But it was rice, fruit, and fish for a weight loss program. But they didn't get much rice, right? So it was 800 calories per day, where most of us need 2,000 to 3,000 calories a day. So it was ultra low calorie. And that also is the Pritikin and Ornish type of diet, where it's ultra low fat and low calorie at the same time. But I prefer to eat the foods that are available on low carb, high fat diets. It's just tastier for me. And the calories that are kept down because the hunger is kept down. You're not in that kind of junk food and constant carb eating. And you wouldn't know it that carbs make you hungry until you stop them. And then you realize, why am I not hungry? Oh, I'm not eating the carbs. Or is it the ketosis? Or is it so that's one of the problems with this area I've been in putting studies out there. People would say, well, you don't know the mechanism. And well, it might be 10 different things. I'm not so focused on the mechanism, but our reductionist researchers are. They want to know the mechanism that causes fatty liver, for example, without regard to the inputs into the diet. And I can fix fatty liver by changing the carbs and changing the food. But the experts want to know, well, independent of what food this person's eating, what can we do to fix fatty liver, when you don't need to fix the fatty liver if you stop the cause in the first place? So that's part of the confusion too. Our reductionist scientists want to know the one mechanism, and that's what's getting us into this whole drug treatment, the shots for obesity now. Because if you isolate one hormone that's really powerful, it can be helpful. One of my patients watched the shot discussion on TV, and she looked at me and said, that's the same thing that happens on a low carb diet. The food noise goes down, the hunger goes down. Why are they just talking about the shot? Oh, right. It's something you can sell, right? And people think they can't give up their fruit or their chips. So it's an interesting thing, but yeah, carbs make you hungry, and you wouldn't know it if you didn't stop them. And this has been known for a long time, and it does boil down to biochemistry and physiology. And sadly, students aren't being taught this. I can pretty much, I'm at a university and where we have really smart medical students and smart internal medicine trainees, and I talk to them about this. For some of them, it's the only half day, meaning it's the only 4 hours of nutrition they're getting in their entire experience. So I have to be really quick in what are you made of? First, well, water, then protein. So what do you think we should eat? Water and protein. Yes. I think 1 out of 50 trainees, I can lead them to that. Otherwise, it's usually, well, we need fruit, right? No, we don't need to eat fruit. So anyway, when you come down to first principles, what are we really made of, and we need to replenish, it's protein. I mean, water is a given, but so when you come at that angle, it's pretty easy to figure out what to eat. So I talk about basic nutrition and science. Again, it's like we're just following what the food does into our body. It's science.
You are a proponent of a low carb diet, as you've said several times already. It's also known as a keto diet. What I do find, however, is that when I talk to people about the keto diet, I tend to get pushback because of that keto term. But it is a low carb diet, I should say. And whenever you explain that they're the same thing, I get less pushback whenever I emphasize the low carb nature of the diet. What do you think it is about that keto term that triggers people or puts people off?
Well, so it's a double-edged sword. For some people, it's a strong term. You're actually using new science when it's really old science. Most of the medical people have heard keto or ketosis, and osis means the abnormal condition of. So if you didn't know anything about it, you'd say, oh, ketosis must be bad. Because osis, like halitosis, is bad breath, right? So if you don't know anything about it, you'll assume it's bad. Most people know about diabetic ketoacidosis, which I've never seen ketoacidosis in my clinic using a keto diet until these medicines that have come out that cause ketoacidosis. I mean, so the medicines today, they're strong, they work, but they have some pretty serious side effects. So when I ask people, what direction you want to go in, you can just eat whatever you want, and doctors will give you powerful medicines that really don't fix the issue. That's the saying today is, you don't just drug the fish if there's a dirty fish bowl. You clean the fish bowl. I mean, they're still going to be getting toxins, right? So the interesting thing is keto, we all do it. There was an old commercial in the U.S. for a dish soap called Palmolive. It was brilliant commercial, and so they were at the nail salon, and the Madge, I think it was it's one of these things that just stuck in everyone's mind, and she's having the woman soak her nails, and they're talking about Palmolive dish soap, and she goes, "You're soaking in it," and she, so everyone goes into ketosis. Everyone goes into keto if you don't eat for 2 days, or if you don't eat carbohydrate for 2 days. So it's natural. And this took me about 20 years to sort of percolate through. I'm an old paradigm guy. I mean, I grew up carb eating and carb loving and being in that world of that's the only way it can be. Until I went to another country, I didn't know you could drive on the left-hand side of the road. That's really weird. It even feels wrong when you're there. You looked at, so there are signs, look this way for oncoming cars, because if you go to a different country, so anyway, that's kind of like the same thing about keto. Keto really just means you're burning fat. Jeff Volek at Ohio State and Steve Finney at UC Davis, emeritus professor, created the company Virta Health with Sami Inkinen. And I've talked to them, now for 30 years, and euketonemia would be a better term than ketosis, meaning, we don't say glucosis, we say glycemia. So glycemia meaning glucose in the blood, and it's not abnormal. So glycosis would mean abnormal. So if we could come up with ketonemia is a better term, because it just means ketones in the blood. But if you do a blood profile and they've only measured the ketone level in people who eat carbohydrates, it's abnormal to have an elevated ketones in your blood. So if you compare yourself to those who eat carbs, some of the blood levels are going to be different. It's not that it's abnormal. A friend of mine who was, tall in the U.S., but in his own right, traveled to a country where everyone was short, and suddenly he was abnormally tall. So the context matters. Everyone goes into ketosis after 2 or 3 days, ketonemia, excuse me. And so I finally woke up this year thinking, how can that be bad? My cell phone says low energy. Do you want to go, battery low? Do you want to go into low energy mode? And it struck me, and it was almost like a little bit of a hallucination. I know it's really kind of a brainstorming technique as you turn things upside down. So I wondered, what if my phone told me, should I go into self-destruct mode? Well, of course not. The phone's not going to say, should I? Well, that's what ketonemia is. That's what fat burning is. If you aren't eating anything for 2 or 3 days, you go into fat burning because that's what we've stored on our body. And I bet we're going to find out that there are certain efficiencies that are kind of, when you go into a safe mode on your phone, low battery mode, it doesn't check for emails as often, doesn't reach out, I'll bet the condition of ketonemia, well, we already know it has sort of an anti-inflammatory effect, the ketones directly on the inflammasome. So, so I've come full circle around thinking, it's probably healthy and even healing to be fat burning, and because what kind of system would be created to self-destruct after 2 days of no food? This makes no sense. You would make a safe mode, like on a computer, where you're going to be more efficient and hold on to things maybe a little better. Well, that causes plateaus to the consternation of my patients, that they'll be losing weight, and then the body says, "Oh, I'm going to hold on even more." So you just got to keep doing it, so it should be ketonemia, and even then, U means normal. So ketonemia would mean normal ketones in the blood because you're burning fat, and ketones are used where glucose used to be used if you're a carb eater. It might even be that it's healthier to be in that ketonemia state, but everyone calls it ketosis, so it must be bad.
So what does a low carb diet then look like as far as the macronutrients are concerned? How much in terms of carbs, fats and proteins should we be eating or consuming a day?
So, I was taught by doctors who were in clinics who didn't have total control of people at home, or even when they came to the clinic. So there was a much less focus on knowing exactly what people were eating. Then, I'm into this 10, 15 years research and then clinical care. People started coming in, what should my macros be? I didn't know what it was. So the internet keto came out with the idea of apps and knowing for sure what you should have and every day. And I'm like, a wolf, they might not even eat every day, or, depending on the circumstances. And you think you think we know exactly what you should have every meal based on I'm actually in a situation where I help people unlearn this excessive focus on percent fat in the diet. I think there's a range, and I think some days the range might be 0. Some people come to me having a fasting day now. They're fixing their diabetes or other serious metabolic problem. To not eat for a day seems like a pretty reasonable thing as a doctor to allow happen. I mean, I could be prescribing a drug, or my surgical colleagues down the street would be happy to go in and make your stomach as big as a hen's egg. That's called weight loss surgery. So you're always, at least I'm always comparing what I allow someone to do or ask someone to do compared to other methods that doctors use, because what I teach people is prescription strength. So I don't know the right macro level. If you focus So the way I teach it is protein comes first. We're made of protein. So really eat as much as you want. If you eat animal-sourced foods, I don't worry about the fats because you're going to be getting fats from the animal sources. So it's meat, poultry, fish, and shellfish, and eggs, really, until you're comfortably full. A little bit of vegetables and leafy greens and a little bit of cheese, mayo, and cream in the coffee. I mean, these are just kind of things that people are used to having. So we figured out ways to get lower carb versions of those things, but it's just real food. In fact, I had a student project. She said, you have this list of foods. Why don't I put it on a wall poster? And she did. It's like this big poster that you would see at a research meeting, large and blown up, and people look at it and it's just food. Keto is it's just food. Yeah, that's right.
You spoke earlier about carbs and about them not satisfying our hunger cravings. If I could talk then in that context then about carb addiction, what is exactly happening within our bodies such that we are constantly consuming these things that never seem to satisfy us?
I'll just talk to a smoker, right? Or if you've smoked yourself, if you get into an addiction, satisfying the craving with the addictive drug will just perpetuate the addiction. And so Gary Taubes wrote a book, The Case Against Sugar, which is a great read about how the addictive nature was kind of known. And around the year 1900, the sugar industry lobbied the governments to allow sugar to be in foods and drinks. And so there are a couple textbooks now showing the scientific rationale that sugar meets the criteria of an addictive drug. So you crave it when you don't have it. And so but when I say sugar, I want you to remember that it's any starch. I've had people addicted to bread. They just can't give up the bread. And now some people argue, well, it's the gluten that's affecting the brain. Yeah, that could be that as well. But the giving up of something, so I used to be in smoking cessation research for 10 years and helped people with medications to get off cravings. Most people still quit smoking by cold turkey, meaning stopping all the cigarettes on one day. You go through a craving period of time. You might use medication now or nicotine replacement for that withdrawal. That's the same thing that happens when you cut carbs out. The sugar, you'll crave them, but it's remarkably fast for most people. If you don't give in to the craving for the carb initially, the bread, the pasta, the rice, the fruit, it's just a few days, maybe a week for the extreme cases. You get over these cravings really fast if you don't eat them to satisfy the craving, so it kind of depends how much in the weeds you are or in the smoke or whatever. This fellow came in, so I know how to fix a craving for cigarettes. I was working with an inventor who figured out many different methods for smoking cessation. And I said, wow, I might be onto something new. I got my paper ready to write down. And he goes, if I smoke a cigarette, my craving goes away. In all honesty. And I'm like, well, but the point is to get you off of the cigarette. So if you satisfy the craving of fruit with fruit, you're never going to get off the fruit. But then people say, well, but you have to eat something. You don't have to smoke. Well, you don't have to eat junk food and highly sugary foods. There are plenty of other tasty things. And actually, you can have sweet things. People come to my office and I teach doctors and one person came in afterwards, you teach people how to cheat. And I said, no, what do you mean? He said, well, you taught them how to have, chocolate mousse at a French restaurant. And I said, yeah, because there aren't many carbs. So you tell people to have, a flan for dessert. Yeah, because the carbs are really low. So again, that science says, gravity, it's the amount of carbs, the type of carb, and it's actually remarkably easy to give them up, especially, if changing your food, just stopping these foods for a while, reversed your diabetes. This is powerful stuff. This is prescription level changing of the food. And I think historically that's been one reason why it's been kept away from the public. because it is really strong, and it would mean you don't need medications. And now the internet has blown that up because everyone can see information, well, for the most part, without the filtration of the medical world that really is still steering people toward medication as the answer.
You reference it there. There's so much information out there on the internet, so much conflicting information. And indeed, I think you've even broached that subject yourself, because you've used the word clarity in the title of two of your books. That's Keto Clarity and Cholesterol Clarity. Could you talk to us about what you think, whether the internet is good or bad as far as dissemination of good, reliable, scientifically researched information is concerned?
Yeah, that's a good question. And my latest book, End Your Carb Confusion, it doesn't always end the carb confusion because of the internet, right? So in fact, sometimes I'll, in the context of one-on-one meeting somebody in a clinic, I'll just say, look, turn off the internet, just listen to me, and that's going to be perceived as, why listen to me? Well, the person came to my office and they've met me, and so it might not work through the internet version of things. But I think on balance, the internet's fantastic, and getting the information out. And the main message that I give is always consider the source. If you're going to be learning from someone who's using a keto diet to win the world's record in a triathlon, they're going to have a different perspective than if you're trying to lose weight or reverse diabetes. So you want to always consider the source. Have they used it for what you're trying to use it for? Even better, talk to a doctor, listen to a doctor who is in a clinic using it with people, because I could be pushing one way and no one ever comes back to tell me, it didn't work for me, or I need to have this change or that change. So we learn in a clinic how to work the nuances of, well, you didn't tell me you were on a pill that caused weight gain, or you didn't tell me that, the kids were coming to town, and so the clinical approach is ultimately best. But so if you're new to just listening to people on the internet and trying things, try something for a week or two, say 2 weeks. If it's not working, move on to something else. If it's not working, it's like take a test drive of that car. If you don't like it, move on to another one. I think eventually everyone will end up in a low carb approach, because on balance, you don't have to do really extreme versions. You don't have to avoid all eggs, for example, or avoid all vegetables. It's kind of a middle of the road. While it might be perceived as extreme because the world is just full of carbs, as a weight loss and healthy eating approach, it's actually kind of workable, and it has to work. So that's the other thing. In my office, all I do is help people lose weight, reverse diabetes, other metabolic issues. If what I did didn't work for a substantial portion of people, at least, I wouldn't have a job. Nobody would come back. And I learned this method from two of my patients who did it without me. It taught me about it. So I'm always reminded that you can follow a book, a doctor, and reverse this without a doctor. Except be careful if you're on medications, because the medications can become too strong. So I think on balance, the internet's fantastic.
And you have your own YouTube channel on the internet, which I'll pop a link to that channel in the show notes for this episode. Indeed, I'll pop a link to your books in the show notes also. Before I let you go, Doctor, could you tell us how people can find you, your website, etc. online?
Focusing on Adapt Your Life Academy, adaptyourlifeacademy.com. We have courses that people can take. We put people into classes, if appropriate, to start people out. That's the Keto Made Simple, kind of our flagship course. And so you can set up on a waiting list. We open the class periodically throughout the year, support you as you get started. The other classes we have are specifically dealing with stalls, protein by the world's leaders, clinical leaders in the information on protein, Dr. Eads and Dr. Eads, Mike and Mary Dan, two of my teachers. And so what we've done at Adapt Your Life Academy is assembled what we think are the premier sources of information for you. Of course, there is a small fee because it's a company, and you'll find that materials are top notch. Video quality is fantastic, and you get all this information. But we've kept it as affordable as we can to try to get the information. So AdaptYourLifeAcademy.com is really my focus. Now, on the clinical side, if you're a doctor, healthcare coach, and all, I've helped to start an organization called the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners, or SMHP. And this is a group of people who are similar minded that we need to treat metabolism, and diet as a really important tool. And so if you're a practitioner, check out the SMHP, Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners.
I love the philosophy. I really appreciate your time today, Dr. Eric Westman. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for tuning into this episode of the Happy Habit Podcast. If you enjoyed it or any of the previous 400 episodes, show your support. Like, subscribe, share with others who you think might get value from these episodes too. You can leave the podcast a positive rating on iTunes or on Spotify. And if you're on YouTube, remember to become a subscriber. You can click that bell notification for any future videos that come every Monday and Thursday. And you can leave a comment below any of the videos. Until next time, stay happy.